Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this virtual conversation. For those of you who are not familiar with this series, St. David Center hosts an ongoing in person community education series about a range of topics that relate to child development with insight from our experts. Typically, we'd host these sessions in person, but as we move to this online format, we're excited to kick things off with a topic that many families will be able to relate to, whether or not they're familiar with it yet. I'm Maureen Walsh, Chief Advancement and Strategy Officer at St. David Center, and I'm joined by Kate Biederman, one of our most experienced occupational therapists, for a conversation about sensory diet. We'll be talking about what sensory diet means, why it's relevant to children and adults alike, how we might see responses to sensory diet show up in behaviors, especially during this increasingly stressful time, and how we can support one another, our children, and our families to help them thrive. Now I'd like to say hello to Kate Biederman, who, as I mentioned, works closely with our staff and families alike in our occupational therapy program. Kate, you've also become an internal expert and advocate for our families in understanding these various nuances of sensory processing. I'm excited to talk to you more today about what we're calling sensory diet. Kate, go ahead and introduce yourself if you would.
Well, I'm so glad to be here as well, Maureen. Thanks for inviting me. I am an occupational therapist. I'm also an integrative health coach. I've been at St. David's Center a really long time. And I'm really passionate about helping people understand the framework of sensory diets and how we can use them to support our children's ability to bring the just right level of activity and management to their day and the things they need to do.
Great, that's great. So Kate, just level set, creating a new platform for us to build off of today in our knowledge. Begin with just helping us understand our senses and how the brain processes information through them.
Sure, that's a big question, but I'll give it a go. From the very beginning of development, even in utero, our bodies and brains take in sensory information from our environment and from our body and organize the information so we can respond to the world effectively. We're all familiar with the 5 basic senses. We learned that in elementary school. When we OTs think about sensory diet, we consider 7 important senses that impact our ability to be comfortable in the world, to regulate our activity, attention, and emotions, to move through our environment, to learn, and to interact with others well. The 5 basic senses, as you know, sight, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, as well as 2 other really important senses. The proprioceptive sense senses our muscles and joints, and the vestibular sense senses movement, specifically movement of our head through space, but it orients us to where we are in the world, where we're moving. And together, those 7 senses really impact how we feel in our bodies and therefore how we can be in the world.
So then take it a step further and help us see the connection between the brain, the senses that you just described, the brain, the body, and our emotional state.
They're so interconnected. They are just intimately interconnected. The body, the brain, and our emotions. The regulation of activity, attention, and emotions are impacted by so many things. And one of those things is our physiological state. It's also impacted by our mental state. It's impacted by our emotions that arise. It's all together. Basically, we really need to feel safe and comfortable in the world. Some people have sensory systems that are super sensitive and pick up sensations easily. Those people may feel bombarded by the sensory world. They might not be able to ignore the feel of their clothing on their bodies or tune out background noises. They may actively move away from some kinds of sensory input because it's uncomfortable or perhaps even painful. Even for other people, it's certainly not painful. Other people have sensory systems that don't easily pick up information. They might not feel the pull of gravity on their bodies. They might not know where they are in space. They might have real difficulty tuning into the important information in their visual world. So they might trip as they move from one level to another level that's just a little bit different. So they may have difficulty picking out the important sounds in their environment and miss out on important information. Some of those people might actively seek out sensory information to give their bodies the information they need to be more adaptive in the world, and yet that in and of itself may not be adaptive in the world. Oftentimes, for people who have trouble processing sensory information, their ability is variable, which can be very confusing, not only to the people, their caregivers and their friends, because they may respond differently day to day or even hour to hour, depending on everything that is going on with them. But it also can be really confusing to them. The world can be really unpredictable, uncomfortable, and even unsafe in their bodies. Another thing to just be aware of is that when in states of high emotion, including stress responses, their sensory systems, their ability to process sensory information may be diminished. So even more compromised than usual. And that's actually true with all people. When we're in a state of stress, it's more difficult to be regulated and to process sensory information.
That's super helpful. I wonder if you could give us an example, just break it down really simply for us. Think about when the brain, the body, and your emotional state are in a when you're in a position or in a state of being where all three of those aspects of who we are as humans are all aligned really well, and you're calm or you're alert. Like give an example of what that looks like, what's happening in your brain, what's happening in your body, and how you might feel.
So I might feel really comfortable and have the right level of activity and intention to do what is in front of me. And this is important because it does change. You know, we talk about regulation a lot at St. David's Center. Even the youngest kids know about regulation, and they know that that means they are feeling, they probably think that means they're feeling calm and focused alert. It also, though, if they're out on the playground, kids need to have a higher level of activity. We don't want a child out on the playground to be just sitting and unable to play actively with their friends. We don't want a child to be so low energy that they can't focus, they can't interact with other people. So there's, again, we talk about in our theory base, we talk about the just right level. So the just right level of activity level. So in the morning, I have to I have to wake my body up. I will use my senses to do so. And we all do. We all have our own strategies to wake up in the morning. You know, perhaps you take a shower, perhaps you do some yoga, perhaps, you know, other than drinking coffee for adults or other things like that, we can do it without the use of chemicals. We can wake up without the use of chemicals. We can also calm down. So it's the ability to have active, alert, focused attention, the right energy level or activity level, and feeling safe and comfortable emotionally. That would be a state, I think, of regulation.
That's really helpful. So then, is that what you mean by sensory diet? Is basically having all those inputs uh, help you arrive at whatever goal you're trying for, whether that's focused, alert, or a more calm state.
Yeah,
Say
yes.
say more about what sensory diet really, what OTs mean by that, and how it can be a helpful way for parents to think about what their kids need.
An effective sensory diet is really built into a child's daily routine. It's kind of a both and. It's built in, it is sensory meals. So we use the analogy of nourishing our body. So it's sensory meals or scheduled activities that we know support that child. So it might be, for some kids, I'm just making this up, but it might be that a parent knows that their child really needs to move in the morning. So, and they have a mini tramp. And so at some point before or after breakfast, maybe they give them some time, put on a song that's very rhythmical, that is organizing, and lets them jump on the trampoline. Perhaps they know that resistive sucking, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but resistive sucking helps organize the child. And so they make the child a smoothie for breakfast, or have something for breakfast that requires chewing really hard. So that's providing sensory input as well as nutrition, but sensory input that helps our body be regulated. So the sensory meals that we talk about are built into the daily routine. And then ideally, the parent also has a repertoire of sensory snacks that they can, and those would be activities they know help support in specific kinds of situations, or when the child is in a specific state, when they're too active or not active enough. Or they're having trouble focusing for whatever reason. So sensory diet is body-based, is a repertoire of body-based activities built into the routine and pulled into the routine to help kids or adults focus and have that just right activity level or energy level to be focused and to manage their emotions.
Got it. So how do you know when a sensory diet is off?
Oh, you look at behavior. I mean, from the outside looking at a child, you're going to look at a behavior. Oftentimes, there's a question even within the OT world, is it sensory or is it behavior? And so often it's a combination of both. It's a both and. So we look at behavior. Now we know that behavior can be impacted by lots of things. It can be impacted by stress. It can be impacted by emotions, by not getting what you want if you're a young child. It can be impacted by being too tired, by being too hungry. It can also be impacted by your sensory environment and how your body is able to process information at that time. So we need to become detectives looking at behavior. This is how the child is presenting, knowing or believing that children don't misbehave to misbehave. They misbehave to meet a need of theirs. And sometimes those needs are sensory input that provides physiological organization to the body. So we see a behavior, we consider if it could be a sensory need, we implement a strategy, we see how their behavior changes. Yeah, so it's a trial and error detective work. What is the behavior? I know this theory, do this activity, what happens?
Give a couple examples of what parents might need to help parents understand how behavior can be a way for a child to basically be saying what they need through their behavior. What kinds of behaviors would you typically, as you're starting to work with a family, maybe there is a sensory processing need, or maybe it's just the, parents that you're or staff that you're talking to about what kinds of behaviors do we often see as parents or teachers that tell us that kids are needing some kind of sensory input that they're not getting?
I'll approach that two different ways. First of all, take the child who is super sensitive to touch input. The behavior you see might be they are super picky about what they wear. Perhaps they will not wear jeans. Perhaps they will not wear underwear. Perhaps socks have to be just right. Perhaps getting dressed in the morning is just a major battle. Even if the child sometimes is wanting to get dressed, perhaps that child is just super sensitive to touch input. As if the child is in OT, we'll explore specific strategies that help not desensitize as much as providing the body with deep touch input, heavy work input, using the muscles and joints, that working them hard, that helps the child reorganize that feeling in their brain and feel more comfortable in the world. Another behavior that's really common is a child who is super active and seeming to crash and fall and tackle and bump other children, pets their dog way too hard, just has a hard time controlling their activity. All kids need to move, and that's all kids need to move, and they need to move regularly. But there are kids for whom it is just super. They are seeking, seeking, seeking. For a lot of those kids, that movement sensation is not really registering in the brain, and we need the movement input to register in the brain. It pulls so many different bits of information together in our brain. It tells us so much. And so if they are not getting that input into their brain because of how they're wired, their brain and body are wired, we will explore with the family what kind of input can we give them with intensity and very often and for a longer period of time to decrease that need to seek movement. And we
Okay.
could go through many, many examples, but those are two examples.
Yeah. Are you, help us think about, maybe children that are not actually engaged in occupational therapy, but for parents that are listening to this session and are curious about how they can just help be that sleuth in their own, that detective in their own children's lives. What kinds of things would they be paying attention to as the day progresses, to know, particularly now during COVID, where many kids are at home more of the time. What are the times of the day, or the kinds of um, uh, time periods or activities where kids may be letting their parents know they need something more, or they have too much of something, that their meals, their sensory diet is off in some way.
Yeah, and I appreciate that question because in OT we work specifically with kids. I mean, we work with a lot of kind of kids, but one of the issues we address is for children who have difficulty processing sensory information. And some of the body-based techniques can support all of us, can support us in our own ability to be well regulated, our ability to have the right activity level or energy level for the task at hand, the right attention, and the right ability to manage our emotions. So even if it's not a sensory processing root cause, we still need in our lives activities that help our bodies and brains stay organized. And we can do that in part, a lot of ways. But one way is through the activities that we do and the sensory input our body gets. So oftentimes, kids who perhaps have a little bit of trouble processing sensory information may go to school and look really good. They are holding it together because school is a place where they know they need to behave, and they then may come home and really struggle and be really difficult for their family because they've been holding their need to move perhaps, or their need to do other things down, and then at home where it's safe, they may just become really difficult. We see that often with kids with sensory processing difficulties. In this time right now, life is different for, I want to say everybody, and I might be wrong, but it's different for so many, and it's got different kinds of stressors. We've got kids who are in school, or kids who are in school part of the time. We've got kids who are learning at home. We have parents who are working outside the home and parents who are living at home. It's just everything is different. Schedules are different, and schedules do help ground. Routines and schedules help ground kids. So now we've got this world where we have the opportunity to be thoughtful and to, when we're best, if we're able to, muster up all of our resources, design routines and schedules that support our kids' ability to be well regulated. I'm getting a little bit lost in what I'm saying, but so with that, I'm going to have to have you bring me back to the real question. I get excited about this stuff. So with that, we do have opportunities to build into the routine things to support the kids when we know about these ideas, or when we can believe that, yeah, kids really need to move and we need to build that into their day. Me personally, working at home, I can spend a whole day, if I'm at home, I'm both home and in the office, but if I'm at home like today, I can just sit and focus in this quiet environment. It supports me well because of how I'm wired to a point. And then I have to move. I have to get some sound in the environment. I have to do something, or I just get too low that I lose my focus. Bring me back to the question now, Marie.
Yeah, no, I honestly, Kate, I think you are speaking to it. It's the question of how parents can very practically think about parents of all of kids of any age and uh, distance learning, going to school every day, the entire range. The I think my question is really about how to start breaking down the day in a way that helps you, or that where you're pausing and you're really trying to understand what your child's telling you. So you gave some examples of what a parent, how you might pay attention to how your child wakes up. What are the kinds of things that you can do first thing in the morning, to watch for what they need, and potentially try some new strategies. Are there, as you think about COVID and kids learning from home, or even potentially preschool, uh, um, how would you? What are some other times of the day that I think that could present particular problems for parents of, regardless of the age of the child, where behavior says that the child needs something more? Are there another couple times of the day that offering some specific strategies or things you're looking for as a parent could be helpful to our audience?
Yeah, let me give you a number of strategies that can be helpful, and just they're theory-based strategies. And I do think in a distance learning situation, it is harder than I can imagine. I don't have kids at home, and there are opportunities within that, because instead of the child having always to go with the whole class group, and I do understand there are meetings they need to sign into and all of this, but there is opportunities for a little bit more flexibility. Perhaps there might be. I'm not in every household, I'm sure. But I think things to think about is tapping into those sensory systems. So the system of movement, the system that senses movement, kids need to move. They might get less movement if they're in distance learning, or if they can't go out into the community like they could. So make sure movement breaks are scheduled in on a regular basis. If they need to wake up, have a dance party, just a short dance party. Say, hey, we're going to put on this song with a lot of rhythm and we're going to dance, or do animal walks, or jump on the trampoline, do something if they're just kind of dragging, or if, and this is counterintuitive for a lot of parents, if they're seeking a lot of movement, give it to them with intensity for a short period of time and see what happens then. Let them work in different positions. Let them lie on the floor and work. Have them sit on something that's a little bit unstable, like a pillow, or you can buy like move and sit cushions that just give them a little bit of wiggle, which can help them focus. Put You can get exercise bands like at department stores, tie that around the legs of their chair so they can push against that on their chair. So give them opportunities for movement. And I already jumped into heavy work, moving their body against gravity. So if you have more than one story, kids can go up and down the stairs in an activity or in learning environments, just to give their bodies heavy work. outdoors, if you can give a movement break, we're heading into winter, it's going to be challenging in a lot of ways. And they can pull a sled up the hill and slide down the hill. A lot of good sensory input, maybe end of day, but still opportunities. Our mouths are really a place where we get a lot of organization. We can use tastes to alert, like spicy, minty, crunchy foods are alerting, and sweet, chewy foods are calming and organizing. Sour foods are organizing. So we can use tastes. So again, be a detective and say, wow, when my child has this, more alert, more focused, or less. And so continue to watch. So use a straw with smoothies, because we know that resistive sucking can be organizing. Non-food items to blow or to chew on can be organizing and help with that. Think about the sound in your environment. Does your child do best in a quiet environment, or do they need some background sound? Rhythm is really organizing. Actually, Baroque music, Bach music, is recorded, is played at 60 beats per minute. It's just a very steady rhythm, which is the state of our physiological rhythms when we are organized. So having some of that in the background might support some kids, others not so much. So maybe white noise in the background would help their ability to focus. So think about those kind of things. And again, it's a trial and error, trial and error. Think about the visual environment. Visual clutter may be really hard for some kids. An organizing visual, something to organize their vision or their mind, like a picture schedule, might be helpful for kids. I would limit fast-paced videos, because that's so alerting or so overstimulating for especially young kids. You might have to increase the lighting to help them alert, or decrease it to calm. So again, it's try the theories, pay attention to your own body too. What helps you get into a good state of focus, the right state of focus. And oftentimes what works for a parent will work for a child as well.
I was just going to ask you, what about parents paying attention to ourselves and what our needs are? And do you see, as a therapist, do you see a connection between parents and kids, or do you sometimes see that what parents need is actually very different from what their kids need?
We can see both, definitely. But one thing I have learned and believe strongly in, through my opportunity to come into people's homes via telepractice, and work in their homes where they're doing the work. One thing that I think is really effective is having the parent join the child in activities. So end of day, maybe both parent and child, or middle of day, maybe both parent and child would benefit from a movement break that they can do together. Kids can get a ton of deep touch input, which is organizing, and input to the muscles and joints, which is organizing, and fun and relationship through wrestling and roughhousing with their parent. It also will provide that input for the parent. And maybe you take a wrestling break with your preschooler, to provide both of you with a period of time where you're nourishing your body's sensory systems, can support regulation.
That's great.
But then watch and see how it works. It may not work for you or your child, so pay attention.
Yeah, that's great. And is it obvious when it's working? Because you don't see the troubling or the problematic behavior. You just know you found something that's either a sensory snack or part of a sensory meal. You've discovered something when the behavior isn't a concern. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, if you see the shift in regulation that is needed, then in that day that worked, and I would make note of that and keep a list of those things, and be able to pull those into the daily routine as appropriate. or pull them in specifically difficult or stressful situations. And again, it's really nice to proactively build activities into the day so you don't get into a place where the child is falling apart. Ideally, you have movement breaks or sensory breaks during the day to support the child so that you less often run into those more challenging behaviors.
Right. Kate, just as we're wrapping up here, I'd love for parents that are tuning in to know how occupational therapy can help. Tell us just a few, share a few words about how occupational therapy helps kids with sensory processing challenges. How do you know as a parent when an evaluation might be helpful or when therapy could be useful?
I think for a parent, the when is when the child is really struggling with struggling to pay attention, struggling to manage their emotions, and especially if you see a sensory connection. Or if teachers are saying, he just can't settle his body down. I mean, it's not always sensory, but sometimes it is. So really pay attention to those behaviors that are impacting a child's ability to get through their day without falling apart. Sensory processing also impacts motor development, definitely. And so again, if you have motor concerns, if your child has motor challenges, an OT in the evaluation at St. David's Center will look at the motor skills specifically and at the sensory processing if there's evidence that there's a challenge there. So that would be the when to pursue an evaluation. In treatment, I see really three important things that happen. One is it is so important for the parent and the other caregivers to understand if there is a sensory processing deficit, to understand that, to be able to frame the child's behavior in that way. It is so empowering for parents and for children to understand that. And it is not just behavior, it's not just other things, but there is a piece of sensory processing impacting the child's behavior. That's one of the most important things we can do. And then treating the sensory processing deficit. The sensory diet is an important piece of the treatment. Having a child who has, not just when they're in therapy, but throughout their day, having opportunities to have their sensory systems nourished in ways that support organization and support their ability to be comfortable and adaptive in the world. And then sometimes for some kids, coming into clinic and being able to get real intensity, we have specialized equipment in our gyms and things that are hard to replicate at home and in the environment. We can do some replication, and that is so important. And sometimes a child benefits from coming into the gym for treatment, one-on-one treatment, where they can really get intensity and of stimulation that can help shift the brain's ability to process the information.
Great. And right now, our evaluations all through telehealth, or are they in person too, Kate?
We're doing both right now. We do
Great.
a combination of telehealth evaluations and in-center evaluations. Yeah.
Great. And the very first step a parent would take if they are concerned is talk to their pediatrician, right?
Talk to their pediatrician. Yep,
Great.
absolutely. And I think more and more pediatricians are becoming familiar with sensory processing deficit. It's the medical community. Some of them are really seeing the impact when there's a problem and the change when kids get in treatment. So yeah, or also calling our core office, maybe another first step.
That's great. We're going to wrap up this session. And Kate, I want to just thank you for joining me to talk about this topic. So many of our families and families that we're going to meet through sharing this session today, I'm sure will be grateful for what you've shared. For those of you that are interested in learning more about upcoming session topics, we just have you visit our website at stdavidcenter.org. The core number that Kate just referred to is our central office, and that number is 952-548-8700. Again, more information on our website. Just want to close by saying thank you, Kate Biederman.
Thank you, Maureen. It's a
Have,
pleasure.